Hey, don't miss out. In the right lower corner of the YouTube video, you're gonna see that small red mark. Click on it and select the 4K video quality. You are not going to regret it. Those details are important. The views are stunning. Enjoy! Here is approximately 50-story tall tower in construction. It's supposed to be a combination of retail, office and residential space, targeted towards students and young professionals looking for a connected urban experience, quote unquote, which could be translated into first-time homebuyers who don't know any better in the nomenclature of real estate agents. It was designed by the very large architectural office whose work products populate much of Miami skyline. It sits on a large podium made of a multi-level parking garage. We could see fairly typical reinforced concrete structure filled with concrete masonry and a full height window wall with sliding glass doors and windows. Concrete floor slabs are extended beyond the perimeter of exterior wall, creating terraces. And there are CMU infills right next to the structural columns. The head joint was filled with inflexible mortar, and the gap between aluminium head and the bottom of the concrete slab is left very, very narrow. Mind you, this is right next to the structural column, and therefore the differential movement at this location would be fairly limited. So let's have a look at how it was solved further away from the structural columns. We could see some units are already caulked at the perimeter, and we cannot see from here any kind of dedicated drainage or whip hole system or dedicated weather resistive system along the seals. Most likely the sealant bead is the only protection. Any kind of finish on the terrace that would allow for development of the positive outward slope would end up above the bottom rail of the fenestration, above the drainage layer. Here we reach the west end of the south facade. We'll zoom out a little bit. You can see some of those walls received the stucco, and some of the stucco even received some paint. And this is it. It's just concrete block and stucco. There is no weather resistive barrier whatsoever. This 5-panel white glazing system sits also in the middle of the structural span, which could be roughly estimated at 30 feet give or take, which would normally produce up to 1.5 inch of the differential movement in the middle of the span. We have another look at this cross-like configuration of masonry that sits in the middle of the structural span here, and we can see that all those head joints are very laboriously filled with inflexible grout or mortar. And here, as we go higher, we can clearly see there is no structural support at this location, which is what I wanted to verify by flying this high. Here we can see a mason busily erecting this very configuration of the wall. There is no flushing, water stopping or any drainage that we could see at the bottom of that masonry wall, but it comes with something that looks like a minor depression in the upper surface of the concrete slab. Reinforcement dowels reach approximately the fifth course of the CMU, and there are horizontal ladders for reinforcement of masonry in the horizontal direction. So here in the middle of the structural span we have that configuration of masonry that is obviously misaligned optically and filled with inflexible mortar. On the upper floors we could see that there are holes drilled through the slab in order to place dowels from above, in order to stabilize the head of the masonry wall, as well as provide dowels for the bottom of the masonry wall built on the top of the slab. In a normal configuration you should see sleeves applied to the dowels to prevent those masonry walls from inadvertently becoming structural columns, as well as flexible material applied to the head joints in order to allow them for differential movement. This is the east wall with more masonry, and we see some interesting things here, particularly those slender stacks of CMUs that will most likely be intended to provide a structural support for jambs of the fenestration intended in those openings, and such an exercise sometimes doesn't end well. I investigated a spectacular collapse of a fenestration supported out of the masonry like that in Fort Lauderdale. So here we can have a closer look at the way this wall is reinforced and anchored. There is no trace of any upward sticking dowels above the 9th course of the masonry, and naturally none above the 12th on the right side. Here we can see the head joints. They are also filled with inflexible mortar. And as it blocks only half of the movement, it will lead to inevitable cracks within the joint itself. It's very easy to forecast the pattern of future cracks on this wall. And as we've seen on the south elevation, there would be no weather-resistive barrier whatsoever. It's just a stucco and paint. The best way to diagnose such a wall would be the typical bubble gun test. Zooming out, we can see how tall is this wall. And the typical good practice is to provide the drainage in continuous stretches of walls at least every second floor. We don't see any evidence of that yet. This video was shot in the middle of a workday, and we haven't seen much activity here. On the east wall of the podium, where there is already stucco work underway, it's very easy to distinguish a lack of concern for the tectonics of this facade. There is not a single movement joint produced within that stucco, nor any control joint for that matter. We'll see a pattern of cracks following the horizontal separation lines between the concrete slabs and the masonry infill, as well as the vertical cracks following the separation between the structural columns, as well as some random cracking within the infill itself, which is currently inadequately stressed. This is a parking garage, therefore the concern would be mainly aesthetic. Due to the sheer scale of such a tower, the podium walls are actually most visible for the average pedestrian, and they are also visible from the metromover, as you can see on those pictures taken from a train. And this completes our tour of this building. Now you can more easily understand why this venture is dedicated to students and young professionals. One has to admire candor or honesty of this description. Well, thank you for taking this sky tour with me. I am an architect with over a quarter of a century of experience in a very narrow field of building enclosures, and also a pilot. Please let me know if you enjoyed this tour. It would motivate me to post more.